This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. And welcome into the Huskies Warming House Podcast, episode 160 here in the den. Noah Grant, Nick Maxon here, ready to bring you this show once again. And it's a little bit later in the week, I guess. We're kind of in the middle of the week coming out here on Wednesday. So part of that is timing related to the Stanley Cup playoffs, the second round, of course, in full swing. And part of it is some personal scheduling things as well, too. So bear with us. Unfortunately, for the Huskies Warming House Podcast, our need to follow scheduling related to teams that we cover has dwindled significantly over the past couple of days.
Yep.
Yeah. So really, I would say,
fortunately for those who have an opinion on that, who knows?
I think the only team that really we kind of have a watchful eye on right now is really the Fargo Force in the USHL. I think maybe them being heavy favorites and having a couple of St. Cloud State, both players and alums, or future players and alums. Yeah, it's something that we're definitely keeping an eye on. But as far as what we do have to talk related to St. Cloud as well, a couple of player moves in the NCAA, more specifically the WCHA, and also recently St. Cloud State and the women's hockey team. We're finally circling back and getting a chance to talk about them finally. You thought the Minnesota Wild offseason was going to be interesting. This women's hockey team, I dove into some of the numbers recently, and yeah, they have some work to do. There's no doubt about that. Just a lot of turnover with that roster. Of course, we are going to talk about the Wild, the Wild, of course, but also the Wild first round that we had around the NHL, not related to Minnesota. Crazy upsets, head coaches who definitely don't mince words when it comes to discussing their teams if they happen to live a little bit north of the Canadian border. A lot of things to dissect from that first round that we're going to jump into. And then our extra ice session, we are going to talk about the Wild and their offseason plans and see what they have planned, of course, with Bill Guerin, who has a very tough task ahead of him. So without further ado, we start, as always, with Center Ice View News and Notes in the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Illustrated Weekly Roundup here, Noah, and shall we say there's some drama north of the border, and it's not with the Winnipeg Jets for once, which we'll cover a little bit later post round one.
Still might be.
It still might be, but this goes back to the Ottawa Senators. Never did I think, Noah, especially for this franchise, we would see a bidding war with the names that are associated with it. This has gotten very interesting. So I guess one name that has been floated around and has now made an official offer, and that is the Remington Group, and more importantly, Canadian actor Ryan Reynolds, part of that, along with real estate mogul Christopher Brady. Has prepared a more than $1 billion bid to purchase the Ottawa Senators. But so that one, not a surprise. However, what maybe is a surprise is, better late than never, I suppose, hip hop artist and entrepreneur Snoop Dogg has joined businessman Nico Sparks to also put in a bid to buy the Ottawa Senators. And for those who maybe are casual hockey fans, Snoop Dogg and hockey seem like, what the heck kind of moments. And if you've watched the LA Kings broadcast, he's been predominantly shown. He's actually been on play-by-play a little bit out there with that crew. He actually has a lot of fun with it. He's actually a very big hockey fan out there. So to have him involved in this, Number one, this is great for the league, right? But more importantly, for the Ottawa Senators, who, shall we say, have had their share of struggles over the last decade plus, this is great for that organization. If you're going to have a bidding war, if you're going to have a couple celebrities, why not have it like this? This is awesome.
Yeah, it's too bad you couldn't combine the groups together. I think that would be an interesting combination that brings a lot to the table here. In Snoop Dogg,
Canadian fashion, you can never rule it out. They may just come together and do it.
Well, you just wonder what the personalities are like. Do they match? Do they not? You don't really know. But Snoop Dogg, yeah, for a lot of people who don't know, I mean, kind of the OG when it comes to like wearing hockey jerseys, when it comes to like hip hop and things like that. And really, like you said, has been a hockey guy for a long time, has been in the NHL EA Sports franchise as well, too, with some voiceover things. He's done a lot of really cool things. However, I don't know how much of that expertise is rolled into managing
ownership, right?
Yeah, ownership of an NHL franchise. I think when I look at this, not to say that it wouldn't be great, I think maybe just me feeling like Ryan Reynolds is maybe more equipped with his group to do that. But again, the majority of this could be controlled by Nico Sparks, and Snoop Dogg could just be kind of the face value name attached to that and kind of generate brand interest. So I don't really know. What I can tell you is, regardless, the NHL and more specifically the Ottawa Senators ownership group currently has a very great problem on their hands, because regardless, it's going to be a win-win for all parties involved, and it's going to be a massive injection of personality for the National Hockey League. And last time I checked, we're definitely under hitting in that regard. So it'll be good.
So very good news up there in Ottawa. Speaking of other good news north of the border here, Noah, this is kind of surprising also a little bit. The Flames, in agreement with essentially the province of Alberta, now mind you, this is a principal agreement, has finally apparently come to an agreement to replace the Saddle Dome. Mind you, this is not that long ago, right? Where the city essentially rejected a bid. I think was that a year or two ago.
Yep. And
their reason was cost overruns. However, the city's shall we say commitment to that was what, $250 million. It's almost doubled by that. It's So this is kind of interesting, but I think maybe what this signals, and we'll get to the details in a moment, is that I think maybe they're being more realistic about the cost. It did seem that previous proposal was well under, shall I say, realistic expectations of the cost of the stadium. So let's break it down, right? So not just the arena, right? It's going to be an entertainment district. It's going to include a community rink, transit improvements. So this is essentially the new age, shall we say, arena, right? Is that it's not just the building, it's essentially an entire district. Arizona, if they pass their measures later this month, right, we're going to be keeping our close eyes on that, is an entertainment district, arena being essentially the centerpiece of that. And it's supposed to be costing around $1.2 billion, right? $800 million for the event center / the whatever Settle Dome replacement would be. Here's where the city kicks in, right? We talked about its earlier number, $537.3 million, quite a bit more than the $250 that they had agreed in principle prior. And then the CSEC, which I believe is the Calgary Sports and Entertainment Council.
Their conglomerate, whatever it is. Yeah.
They're going to provide $356 million, and then the province of Alberta will contribute $330 million, right? So here's the big part. So they've said that the project will not result in an increase in property taxes or new debt to the city. So this is good, right? But in the sense, again, you kind of figure what the switch was, right? Because again, it was cost overruns, it was things going up, and then all of a sudden everybody walked away. And the number that we're reporting on today is a heck of a lot more expensive than it was just a couple of years ago. To me, it's not inflation. I think, truthfully, and I'm going to grab your opinion on this, Noah, that this really was a more realistic into the numbers bid that's probably more close to reality than what they previously talked about a couple of years ago.
Yeah, not set in stone either, right? I mean, they're waiting for the definitive agreement. So is this Tempe 2.0? I don't really know. But, going back to this piece of, the initial offer to now, maybe it just comes down simply to a little bit of transparency, like you mentioned, where all parties are being a little bit more upfront or a little more willing to negotiate and say, hey, we're not trying to screw you over on one side of this or other. Let's work together. How can we make this work? Or maybe at this point where they're trying to create not only an arena, but an event center. And now the province, now the city is saying, okay, we can find value in that, because not only is it going to help us with the Calgary Flames and that sort of venue, it's also going to give back to a community. It's going to create, new job opportunities, new housing potential, things like that, new tourism opportunities that are going to bring money back into the city and into the province. So maybe that was part of the change too. I'm not really sure, but I think as you look at this, I don't even know if like $800 million, it almost feels low to me in some senses. New arenas now just feel like they approach $1 billion on their own. And
That's
I feel
US dollars, by the way.
Yeah, true. but I feel like the Flames, you've been waiting 40 years for this new arena. So, for them to kind of suddenly have this switch, the other piece of this, maybe COVID a little bit here. I think the original proposal was back around, 2019, but maybe we're at this point now where they're seeing what economic detriment kind of looks like in that city and how they can recover and sustain regardless of that. And they say, okay, financially, we feel like we can be flexible now, given this, recent circumstance that was kind of extreme. And now they feel a little bit more comfortable being more transparent, being more open about those things. So it's a great thing if it ends up happening. I mean, the Saddle Dome certainly has a lot of character for Calgary, but at the same time, it's time for them to kind of be one of those teams that makes the next move.
It really is. And for those of you who don't know, the Saddle Dome quite literally shaped like a horse saddle. In fact, was it the World's Fair or the Olympics that it was some big event?
It was like 1980, wasn't it?
Yeah, 1980 on the dot. So there's a bit of a history. There's a bit of a, shall we say, a landmark to it. It's definitely the most unique stadiums, I would almost argue, in the entire North America, just because of its shape and its original intended use. But it certainly has outdone its age. I know for media members, the catwalk from one side of the rink over into the press box is kind of a rite of passage, and definitely we'll have to try to see if I can get up there for one final game before that. And again, there's not been a set date. Again, there's no renderings available. This is still very early. All we know is that it sounds like they've agreed on essentially a budget is what it sounds like, but there's still many hoops to cross, many steps still to take. This is far away from being signed, sealed, and delivered, but we'll keep our eye on that as we go forward, right, Noah?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where the Saddle Dome actually came from. Of course, the Stampede Corral, when the Flames, of course, don't forget the Flames came from Atlanta in 1980.
Right.
So, of course, they hosted the 1988 Winter Olympics, but
it was before that when it was built. It's
weird because it fell below league standards in 1977, and then the Flames suddenly ended up getting there. I think it actually maybe went back to that original Olympic bid years prior, though. Yeah. Because of course the Olympics in 1988, but you submit the bids, well in advance, like a decade in advance. So it kind of feels like, from what I can see, just a little bit of a marketing thing for the city to kind of help boost, economic stability there too, and also maybe host the Olympics and kind of build on that as well too. So if there's anything else anybody knows about the Saddle Dome, we'd love to hear about it. But I think that's what I can kind of conjure up using everyone's favorite source, Wikipedia. So
always accurate, right? Never anything wrong there. What we don't need Wikipedia for is another change in Calgary. They have parted ways with head coach Daryl Sutter. And supposedly there's some reporting, maybe rumors going around that Jonathan Huberdeau was essentially very vocal about how they just did not see eye to eye with Daryl Sutter. What a change for Calgary in the last 12 months, right? You lose Johnny Gaudreau, you lose Matthew Tkachuk, you bring in Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, a couple of other players to essentially kind of retool on the fly because you kind of had to, right? The Flames did not make the postseason. And then now Daryl Sutter, after exit interviews, is out as the Calgary head coach. Is this surprising to you, Noah, or not so much?
I don't really know. I feel like when you look at Daryl Sutter, he's just one of those personalities that just is who he is. I mean, he's like pure old school, pure farm boy kind of thing, quite literally. And I think that abrasiveness kind of rubs some guys the wrong way. We think about it a lot with, guys that, like Mike Keenan, for example, guys that kind of ruled with an iron fist, and it was their way or the highway. I feel like he's just one of those players. And if you're not used to that standard, if you don't like playing under that kind of standard, John Tortorella, another great example. Yep. If you don't mesh with that, I think you get these differentiating opinions here. I mean, you look at his record though, or I was trying to find it. I just had it up, and from what I remember, though,
you work this episode with all the the on the spot fact finding. It's kind of fun to watch the wheels turn from over here.
Let's see. Well, one of his records, from what I remember, since he's been there, it was like he had almost twice as many wins as he did losses. Like it wasn't like his record was a poor loss, even with the season that the Flames had this year, missing the playoffs by 2 points. I mean, he was very successful in the position that he was in. He had great players, obviously, but he utilized and got a lot out of him. But maybe we're seeing that trend. I know Johnny Gaudreau, has family pieces attached to that too, but you kind of wonder if maybe that was maybe an inkling too, or guys like Tkachuk talking about how excited they were to go to Florida, salary cap wise, among other things. I think let's keep that in perspective.
Maybe 90 degrees in temperature difference.
But maybe there is some underlying. It was kind of nice to get out of, the chains a little bit and the coaching regime that was Daryl Sutter. I'm going to miss him because his press conferences are absolutely legendary. But and I think he's a fun personality regardless. He's just like the angry old dad that someone pissed off a long time ago. But
I never got over it.
I think from what we've been hearing, I'm not as surprised as I was when I initially heard it, because it just sounds like maybe it just didn't mesh as well as we thought from the outside.
But let me follow up with that, because there's a bit of a gamble here, right? And that is, essentially Calgary, first year under, essentially a different looking group, right? Now I get it. It's easier to switch a head coach than it is to players. Again, you've got players that are locked up long-term now because of the return from Matthew Tkachuk. Essentially they're saying this is our team or this is our core. Again, and all of it, indications would tell us that, that core has voiced that they needed a change. But Calgary's in a tough spot here, right? Because like you said, Daryl Sutter, his track record against two Stanley Cups with Los Angeles. Historically, he's been able to get teams squeeze the most amount of talent out of them as possible while being very, shall we say, staunch defensively. And let's just say this, obviously we'll probably talk about this in a different show, but as far as who can replace and who's the best replacement for that, I'm not sure. For the Flames, you're not going to fix this overnight. So this is a bit of a, shall we say, a part of the project of a rebuild. First, now it's the players. Now it's the head coach.
Yeah, like I said, it's just a weird spot for this Flames organization to be in for a variety of reasons. We'll have to see how they kind of respond moving forward to next season. Oliver Shillington is supposed to be back next year. Of course, he had some personal reasons that kept him out this year, so that'll be a big addition on the blue line. But Calgary, not only their arena, but their on-ice product has a little bit of reshuffling that's happening, and hopefully maybe a little bit more transparency would help in that regard too. So we'll have to see. Moving over to other teams, the Maple Leafs, the Senators, the Red Wings, and the Minnesota Wild, they are headed to Sweden in November, Stockholm's Avicii Arena. 4 teams traveling to Europe for the first time in NHL history. 4 teams make the same trip, and the first time the Maple Leafs have ever gone outside North America in the regular season. So it's something to keep an eye on there. Currently 21 players on those rosters from Sweden that are expected to take part from the 4 clubs. But of course, some players potentially not with the clubs, like Gustav Nyquist, for example, after we get the news from Marcus Johansson today for the Minnesota Wild, changes a bit of things. But right now, as it stands with the current roster, the Wild have the most with 8 of them. So keep an eye on that. The Wild will actually have the last 2 games of the series. They will have the Senators on November 18th and the Maple Leafs on November 19th to close out the 4-game set. The Red Wings play the Senators to open, and the Maple Leafs have the Red Wings in the middle portions of that tournament on the 17th. So, what a great little event. I think, Sweden, Finland, both really great hotbeds of hockey that we're starting to see. I mean, the Swedes that come over now, I mean, they are truly a powerhouse in the game of international hockey. I think that they've proved that, far and away. So great to see. Great to see the NHL head back there again. Of course, don't forget they're also headed to Australia this upcoming year as well, too, with the LA Kings. So it should be exciting. In other news, former Golden Gopher Hudson Fasching, 2-year contract extension for the New York Islanders, $775,000 average annual value. Good for him. Thought he was all right in the playoffs this year. And then injury-wise, I kind of want to talk about this one for just a little tad here. Normally we don't for our injuries, but Andrew Cogliano, who of course the Avs are done, but 35-year-old out indefinitely after a fractured neck from that hit by Jordan Eberle in Game 6. That was a nasty one. Are you surprised there was no supplemental discipline after that one?
Yes and no. And I think our opinions when we look at a play and there's certainly an injury, and I think whenever there's a neck injury, right? I mean, those are serious injuries, and let's take it one step further. It could have been a lot worse, right? Especially with the position he was in. Now, granted, when we cover the NCAAs and when we cover, shall we say, dangerous checks, or when we cover different things in the NCAA, one of the big differences, and we talked to, again, our friend Mike Schmidt about this, is that it doesn't matter. The player receiving the hit doesn't bear any sort of responsibility on the hit, right? Yeah. However, in the NHL, it's different. They take into account that the game is fast, and that if you, shall we say, put your body in a vulnerable position, that there is an argument to be made that some of the onus is on the player receiving the hit. And this sort of kind of walks that line, right? Where it's, is it really all on one person? Is it a bit of both? And again, I think it's amplified because of the injury, and again, the nature of the injury and the way that he went into the boards, right? And I think we got to take a step back, and I'm certainly not trying to downplay. I mean, this is a terrible injury that, not only could have, had more lifelong consequences, but could have ended his hockey career. And we still may very well, right? We still don't know where this is going to play out, how the healing process is going to be. But no, I think this is the ultimate question, right? When hits like this occur, I think this is where we revisit some of those, shall we say, rules, right? Because according to the rule book, the check was fine, but yet Cogliano, and I see your head going back and forth. But again, we say no, not that we agree or disagree with it, but that's how the rule is written. And in fact, The Athletic did a pretty nice piece on it to kind of break it down. That's like, don't hate the play, but, change the rule. I think my question to you is, does the rule need to be modified? Does it need to be changed? Because as it's written right now, no supplemental discipline. There's none to suggest that it will be coming. And you do have a very prominent veteran player that is out with a serious injury, and again, could be a career-ending injury. Again, we don't know for sure, but it certainly was not a good one.
Yeah, I think what I go back to is the fact that regardless of how the play ended up, Eberle's following the play and sees nothing but Cogliano's numbers the entire time. His real idea is to close that gap and try to tie him up along the wall. Just kind of, close that gap and see if he can force Cogliano just into a spot where he can't really do anything along the wall. Cogliano, kind of a loose puck that he's trying to corral along the half hole, and kind of turns back into the hit a little bit. Definitely didn't help himself by any means here. I kind of feel like there maybe should have been a change. And I'm not saying he should have got 3, 4, or 5 games or anything like that. But I just think when you're seeing numbers the majority of the way, even if your initial intent is to just close and not give heavy contact, if a guy doesn't see you or doesn't feel that pressure behind you, it wasn't
the argument, right? Yeah. And that is the NHL's argument, not to cut you off, but that is precisely the argument from Jordan Eberle's side, which is, hey, I was actually in decent position to make a clean legal check that would have not resulted in an injury, just a little mesh on the boards. And at the last second, when I'm committed to my play or committed to the route that I'm taking, he turns himself into a vulnerable position. So really, at least I would say his argument is this is more or less on him and less on me.
Yeah, like I said, it's always kind of a gray area when you have plays like this because, like you said, it happens so fast. The crazy thing is Cogliano still played the rest of the night, which is kind of scary to think about, to be honest with you. But Yeah, I don't really know. Like I said, I just go back to the idea that anytime you know somebody's back is turned or partially turned, you have to be really cautious about the play that you make, or really kind of maybe have more of an emphasis on making a play with your stick as opposed to, finishing your hit. I get it. It's the playoffs. You want to make sure that you're setting the tone. You want to make sure that you're not kind of leaving anything for granted. I don't really know. I could have seen maybe a game for this. I kind of felt like it was just right on that line where, you give Michael Bunting 3 games for his slew foot body check. I felt like this one kind of, at least towed the line a little bit kind of thing, but
It's
not
tough,
really.
right?
Yeah.
It's really tough because I think from my perspective, right? And again, I'm not the czar of all refereeing or the rule book, right?
That's Max Veach.
Yeah, right. He's got that thing locked down.
Yeah.
But a slew foot, the player receiving the slew foot has literally no impact on that play. Whereas you could argue in this situation, and again, I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but you can make an argument that, again, the injury could have been avoided. But you do have a valid point, right? Which is, the emphasis is on that point if you're trying to play it safe is on the stick, but this is also the playoffs. Playoffs are not in my book. If you are in a position like that physically, and you go to finish the check, I think playoffs or not, I think it still ends up the same. So I think we come back to the ultimate question right now is that does there need to be, I'm not sure if a modification to the rule or rewrite it, but does there have to be, how do we fix this, right? Because
is this going back to like the half-second rule where instead of like defining what interference, like what a late hit is versus not, you're defining how much time the player with the puck has to make a correction in their movement before the hit is late? You know what I mean? In terms of like where the hit isn't late, but now the onus is now no longer on the player making that sudden movement. Now it's on the attacking player or the defending player trying to finish the hit kind of thing.
I'm not sure if it's a timing issue because again, the game happens so fast. And at the end of the day, I'm not sure you can quantify that, maybe is the best way to phrase it. And we've seen this in rules written in the past, and that when you try to quantify something that's in the gray area, it never ends up working the way that's intended, right?
We've been doing this show for 3 years. What the heck is a catch? Still.
Yeah. What the heck is offside?
In the NFL, I have no idea. Yeah,
no idea.
Interference.
It's interesting, right? So, and I don't know. Like, again, and I think we need to restate this, right? I'm all in favor of a rule change that will have an impact on keeping the game safe, but also keeping, it's a contact sport, right? That's the nature of the game. I'm just not sure with this particular play, right? Because every play is unique. That's the one anti-argument I have about those folks that say, oh, the suspension was 3, but this is 1. How the heck can you do that? Well, not every play is the same, right? And the NHL set that precedent when it's taken into account both skaters and what they're doing or what they're not doing, right? So to me, it's hard.
It wasn't the worst hit in the series. I'll tell you that much. The worst one was Cale Makar's hit.
That one was bad. Objectively late, you can maybe argue intent to injure.
So unnecessary.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I'm not sure what the answer is there. I don't know if there is an answer, right? Is it the chicken or the egg, or is it that kind of argument, or is it just an unfortunate series of events, right, that culminate where a respected player, Cogliano, is, out again. He's injured, like you said. He played the rest of the game, so you kind of wonder, what the extent of that injury is. We hope he recovers fully and can return to the ice, and it doesn't affect not only his play but also him off the ice too.
Yeah, wishing him the best of luck. Of course, the Avalanche are out. The Seattle Kraken are headed to the second round. They're actually getting ready to play tonight on Tuesday when we are recording this show. And we head on to the main portion of the show to start actually with some college hockey. And welcome into the main portion of the show here in the Huskies Warming House podcast. Nick Max and Noah Grant here for episode 160 on this Tuesday night, coming out a little bit later than usual. We'll probably be closer, I would think, to maybe a little bit earlier next week. I am moving next Tuesday, actually a week from today. So a lot of things kind of in disarray in my life, more than usual, as Nick would like
Thanks
to
for
say.
clarifying. Yep.
Yeah. Between that and, of course, this is my last week of school and then graduation coming up. So just a couple of things that are kind of being finalized here. So we'll keep listeners and viewers informed. But again, I would imagine no later than I would think Tuesday morning, probably next week, depending on what things shake out. So hopefully we get back to normal a little bit, but we'll have to see. What I can tell you though is that this week we are starting, I believe, on Thursday, May 4th, the Fargo Force, of course, start their journey in the USHL playoffs against the Lincoln Stars. So keep an eye on that one. If you're a Huskies fan, there's a lot of intrigue for a variety of reasons in that. And the USHL playoffs, along with the NHL and AHL, are kind of the last main group here to kind of continue to wrap things up in the U.S. side of things. Of course, you have the Canadian Hockey League playoffs, Memorial Cup stuff as well, too. But yeah, keep an eye on those Fargo Force. I think they really have a chance to do some damage. So as far as NCAA player moves here on the men's side, we only have two here coming from the NCHC. Omaha picking up Zach Erdahl from Wisconsin, and they lose Caden Bolson on the other side. So and then Cooper Moore. I don't remember if we mentioned this. We did know that, of course, North Dakota was losing all of their defensemen. So I can't remember if we did mention this or not. But Cooper Moore is headed to Quinnipiac from North Dakota, which Quinnipiac had kind of a cool little exchange, if you know what I mean. The New York Stock Exchange and their little event that they had out there. So, of course, the Bobcats, like we've covered before, winning their first national championship in school history, beating the Gophers 10 seconds into overtime. But yeah, so for Omaha, if I can do math and figure out how the alphabet works here, questionable. Erdahl coming from Wisconsin. Yeah, coming from Wisconsin, sophomore last season, played in 34 contests, had 6 goals, 5 assists, and 11 points. So not a bad little pickup for Omaha, trying to supplement some of that offense that was lost. They've now added 5 from the transfer portal. They lose Caden Bolson, the junior forward, who had 3 points in 26 games. So really, I mean, pound for pound, you're kind of matching the loss that you just had from Caden Bolson. So a nice little pickup for Omaha in that regard. On the women's side here, we start in Duluth. A lot of players from Bemidji and Mankato finding new homes. Bemidji losing a lot this week. That
they did
finally found homes, so to speak here. Reese Hunt headed to Duluth from Bemidji. And Reese, of course, coming into the season, a senior last season, 36 contests, 6 goals, 6 assists, 12 points on the forward side. So not a bad little pickup for Minnesota Duluth in that regard. Goaltender Suzette Foucher is headed to Mankato and Minnesota State from Franklin Pierce. I don't really know a whole lot about Franklin Pierce. I'm going to be honest with you. Junior last season had 5 contests, a 3.57 and a 9.27. Again, strength of conference is the biggest question mark when it comes to that. But don't forget, Mankato losing 2 netminders, Calla Frank and Emerald Kelly, both a senior and a junior. So the goaltending position is a question mark for Mankato moving forward in that squad. Ohio State adding Kira Zanin from Penn State. They continue to kind of load up with players that are extremely good. Junior forward, 26 goals, 23 assists, 49 points.
Average.
Yeah, in 38 games. Former Team USA U18 player. I wonder why. Yeah. So, yeah, that I'm just going to say it right now, and this is no offense to St. Cloud or anybody else. I would be highly, highly shocked if Ohio State is at minimum not in the Frozen Four and probably not winning a national championship. Like, they are just
said this about the Gophers in the men's side last September. Look what happened there. So,
well, I mean, they did the first part. They did. But the only other news in the WCHA, actually, the Huskies adding a pair of transfers here. Taylor Larson, defenseman from Bemidji State, played in 34 contests last season, a sophomore, more of a stay-at-home defenseman, did not register a point last year. And Maddie Peterson, the senior forward, had 6 goals for RPI last season. So 2 pickups for this women's hockey team here. And let's jump right into it. Our women's hockey coverage here on the Huskies Warming House podcast has been long awaited, kind of because it's really difficult sometimes to get a little bit more information on the women's side, especially like for recruits, incoming freshmen. We're kind of probably still months away from hearing that news here. It's not as readily available at times compared to some of the men's side of things. Thanks to Sid Wolf and people like that really kind of put in that due diligence to kind of do some deep digging on some of those things, because it's the women's side is just a much more challenging realm to get information from, I feel like. But here's kind of the details here, Nick. Diving into the numbers, it's not great. I'm going to be honest with you. McKenna Westlow, Yanina Newland, Tatum Geyer, all 5th-year players. They're all done for sure. So 2 forwards, 1 defenseman. Between the 3 of them, 39 points last season. As far as seniors that are left on this roster, Allie Cornelius was a redshirt senior last year. Clara Himlarova, Taylor Lynn, Addie Scribner, all kind of seniors with decisions, so to speak, have not seen any NWHL. PHF, no news like that. We're probably about a month away from that contract signing period-ish, where we'll start to hear a little bit more. 73 points between those four. The Huskies losing 8 transfers with a combined 37 points between them, 5 forwards, 2 defensemen, 1 goaltender. The 4 seniors, by the way, are all forwards. And the Huskies just gained 1 forward and 1 defenseman with a combined 6 points total that they gained back in the aggregate. So what does that mean? In total, the Huskies are losing 149 points and adding 6 back. If you want to know how that math shakes out, they had 217 combined points among players last season. 143 points means that they are losing 66% of their scoring. They are also losing, for sure, 11 to 15 players, potentially, depending on where the seniors go. With the additions in the transfer portal, that turns, in aggregate, losing 9 to 13 bodies at this point. Losing for sure 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and a goaltender, potentially 11 forwards, 3 defensemen, and a goaltender, and then, of course, getting a forward and a defenseman back. Oh, I mean, that is almost 2/3 of your playing day roster that is disappearing. Now, to be fair, in the transfer group, I would say maybe about 1/3 to half of them were players that didn't see a lot of ice time or were not known as offensive producers, so to speak. So a little bit of a glimmer of hope. I wouldn't be shocked to see St. Cloud's coaching staff really push hard with this senior group of 4 players and say, can you give us 1 more year? Now, I don't know what the freshman group looks like. They might have a very big freshman class waiting in the wings that is ready to step in and kind of start that, not a rebuild, but kind of that infusion of when you're losing, 9 to 15 players potentially. That's
the wave of babies.
Yeah, definitely.
Seriously. Yeah.
Do you think that this team makes a big push to hang on to, Allie Cornelius, Clara Himlarova, Taylor Lynn, Addie Scribner? I mean, obviously play alone, I would want to, but do you think that there's, how about this, a possibility for all 4 of them to return in a Husky sweater?
There's a possibility, but I think, again, the big external factors, right? Are they getting pro offers, right? Because we all know on the men's side, right? When you get those offers, and I think Brett Larson has said this essentially to his players in passing, right? And that is, you don't get an opportunity to play pro hockey every day. So when you get that opportunity, you kind of have to jump on it, right? So to me, that's probably the bigger, shall we say, concern if you're the Huskies coaching staff is, do they get an offer that they like, that they just can't say no to? And maybe to the player, right? Do they see themselves as hockey players post their collegiate career, right? Maybe they do get offers, maybe they look at it and go, well, maybe the pay is okay, but I can maybe only do it for a couple of years. It's, sort of that whole outlook sort of thing. It's hard to say, right? I think there's a chance there, but I think where this comes back to is there's a lot of people screaming at why all this turnover, right? What's going on here? And the simple answer is Brian Idalski. It's that simple. Granted, we saw with the change in play, the players that bought in and the players that didn't. Bailey Burden was a forward that was on the squad for the first semester, then all of a sudden disappeared from the roster, and I haven't been able to figure out what happened with that. That was something that was kind of quiet.
And is in the transfer portal. So
yeah, is in the transfer portal. So this is not uncommon, right? Just because when you have a new coaching staff, and again, we've discussed it on the show about what changed, right? And Brian Idalski simply held up a mirror. He just said, hey, this is on you guys. You've told me what your concerns are. You've told me that you want to win more, but then the reality is we need to make changes, and those changes, the effort comes from you ladies, right? And it's the culture shock that needed to happen. This is a result of that. I do think it's sort of a one-off, right? When you have, shall we say, what's the word, an equilibrium, right? Where if you're a player, this is how things have worked and you're comfortable with that. And then someone comes in, granted the results are much better, right? But you're still maybe this is not what you thought or wanted that experience to look like.
It's almost, I don't know, maybe the word we're looking for is players who became complacent in their role and hadn't been challenged in that, lineup card for a while.
Yeah. And we've seen it with Idalski, right? He was not shy about moving players up and down the lineup. He wasn't shy about essentially being upfront and honest about the situation. And again, from what we know, and we're not saying we have the firm details, but it sounds like a pretty stark contrast to essentially the staff that was before him, right? So there's a chance. I think we talked about the external factors, but the other thing is they have to believe that, it's worth it for them, right? And what does that freshman class look like? Is there enough talent there? Again, Taylor Larson coming in from Bemidji State, she was unfortunately during my Hockey Day Minnesota call, she was the one that unfortunately had that that emergency on the bench that had to pause there for about 15, 20 minutes. And so, but a great player, she skates well. When you put that picture together and you're going back to these seniors that have decisions that they can or maybe have to make, that's the sales pitch, right? Is we need you, one, but also we want you, right? We feel like, there's been some turnover, but what the girls we have coming in, we've elevated the bar. You're a big part of that. Let's do it again because we can still take another step forward, and you'll be a big reason because of that. It's a difficult puzzle, but ultimately it come down to each lady's ambitions, each lady's wants, and whether they feel like it's something they want to do again. I think there's a good chance, but again, these are always very difficult off seasons to predict post essentially a change at the top that had even better results at the end, but knowing behind the scenes even bigger changes were happening that essentially rocked the ship, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, this team, one of the best in St. Cloud women's history, though. 18-1 in the season, 11-16-1 in conference play, 0-2-1 in overtime. They were 15-4-0 when they scored first. So if they got a good jump, which is something that we hadn't talked about often for this women's program in the past couple of years. I mean, think about that. The Huskies had 19 games in which they scored first. And, put that in perspective. They played, 37 contests, essentially half of them, they scored first. I mean, that's a great start for this
over the year prior, put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. And even better improvement over the year prior to the year prior. 3-14-1, of course, when the opponent scored first. So again, obviously I think the next step is, what makes good teams great is, as some people kind of mention, is that, you almost got to be like too dumb to realize you shouldn't be able to claw your way back into a hockey game. And that's what really good teams do, is they kind of level out that statistic when the opponent scores first, or when they're trailing after one period of play, they still find a way to come back in a hockey game. That's what, that next step is, where it's like they have the ability to claw themselves out of, a hole that they've dug for themselves for whatever reason. When they've outshot their opponent this season, Nick, they did it 12 times. They didn't lose a single game. When they were outshot 6-17-1 in the season, they were 4-5 in one goal contests, which again, you're almost 500 in that matchup. I mean, that's basically, basically a 50-50 flip of the coin. You'll take that. 8-8 at home, 7-10-1 on the road, and 3-0 at neutral sites. Of course, their pairwise points percentage was actually a .524. They finished in the top 16 in the country this season, which I'm going to say that again. They finished in the top 16 in the country this season. Not too shabby. When they led after one period of play, they were 10-2-0, 16-1-0 after two periods of play. When they trailed, polar opposites. They only won one game when they trailed after either of those periods. When they were tied after the first, they were 7-6-1, but after the second period, they didn't really close very well. So 1-4 in the season.
And that's, and that's really the next step, right? Is that you see the trend, which is if we're in control of the game, we can essentially take it home, right? We can get the win. Now it's, if things aren't going away, or maybe we're having a rough start, can we, essentially take a step back? Can we take a breath? And then can we just keep fighting and find a way not to chase the game? We usually don't want to chase, but how can you tilt the ice in your favor, play the game that can win, and just, take it shift by shift and then get back in the hockey game. But still lot of progress being made, especially on some of those metrics. Again, you can't, rewrite an entire script overnight, but the parts that they have rewritten, quite impressive, especially year over year from this year to last year.
Yeah, absolutely. -1 goal differential in period number 1. They were actually +3 in period number 2, and I think minus. My math is very poor. Quite obviously, I think -9 in period number 3, and then they did not score in overtime in 2 tries this season. -9 total goal differential this year. Outscored 96 to 87. They were outshot by about 350, 375 shots this season. So still not controlling possession the way that we'd like, but much better improvement. I will say this though, Nick, 20% on the power play, 20 for 100 on the nose this season, and 86% penalty kill.
PK. I think they need to coach the Wild on a few of those, especially the PK.
Yeah, yikes, not great. Overall in the season, though, a 2.35 goals for and a 2.59 goals against. I mean, that's, we're getting closer to 500 and being serviceable in that regard. So you'll definitely take that. Again, like I said, still outshot by about an aggregate of 10. And they were a very unpenalized team compared to the other teams that they matched up with. As far as players that were a very big component of this program, Nina Newland paced the team, 28 points for her in 37 games. Clara Himlarova, 26 points. Emma Gentry, what a great addition. Yeah, no kidding. 22 points for her this season. Taylor Lind, you'd like to see her back. Think about that. Between Taylor Lind and Emma Gentry, there's 44 points. And then if you add Clara Himlarova, you're at 70. So those 3 coming back would be very good. So, Grace Wolf had a really great season from the back end, by the way, 18 points in 37 contests for her. So, and then Addie Scribner rounds out that group as well, too. So, the Huskies, if they can retain some bodies and have one freshman who can assimilate very well, maybe another transfer portal pickup or 2, and a couple of these seniors staying would really help. Something that is not going to hurt them at all. The goaltending tandem, very good this season. Both netminders appeared in 20 contests in some regard. Both had 9 wins in the season. Jojo Chobak had 7 losses and a tie. Sonia Hola lost 11 this season. Between the two of them, 2,203 minutes, a 2.61 goals against between the two of them, 6 combined shutouts, just under 1,100 saves, and a combined 920 save percentage. Each netminder actually carrying a 923 over the course of the season. So how that math works, I don't really know, but apparently it does. So
what's on with you tonight? You're using the math guy. What's happened?
I am looking at the stat sheet, and it says Jojo Chobak 923. It says Sonia Hola 923, and it says the totals are 920. So I don't know if we have a third netminder that's not showing up because of games played, but maybe
the other one was Julia Bacchetti, and she didn't suit because she was redshirted.
Yeah, I'm staring at the sheet, and that's what it's telling me, and I'm too dumb to challenge otherwise. I think let's just put it that way. Now the crux of the issue comes out, doesn't it? The Huskies finished 5th in the WCHA this season. I had 36 points on the year. They were 6 ahead of Mankato and a pretty far cry away from Duluth, who pulled away at the tail end of the second half of the season. 429 winning percentage in conference play over 28 contests, like we mentioned. As far as it doesn't have the actual winning percentage over the season. Essentially, they were basically 500 plus a tie. So all in all, this team had a great year. But looking forward, what do you think the plan is for Brian Idalski, Janelle Sergey, and the rest of the coaching staff? What do you think the plan is to alleviate this ginormous roster turnover? Because Brian Idalski has implemented his standard. Mm-hmm. We all know what it is now. The question is now, how can they get everybody up to speed and feel like they can put a team on the ice that's going to be able to execute that and have a repeat or better season?
I don't think you do anything differently, and here's why. Brian Idalski, when he first walked into that locker room and said, hey, girls, look around the WCHA, who are we going to out-talent? And it was like, well, nobody. Well, let's be honest, right? But then he asked the follow-up question, who are we going to outwork? Mm-hmm. Right? And honestly, it's no different this season, right? And that is, you certainly have talent now. You certainly got, I think, better talent. But I think more importantly, especially in today's game, right, you have to be able to at least have the effort. And that was his big thing was, execution here and there. I think all coaches point on that. But the big thing he stressed this season is, I want you to put 100% effort on that ice at all times. And it doesn't change this year. And I think at the end of it, the Huskies showed resiliency. They showed that when they stick to the structure that they could win. They had a winning formula, and they didn't need, the best talent to do so, right? Now, granted, in the WCHA, granted, they won against Wisconsin. They won against the Gophers. They picked up essentially some big, shall we say, program shifting wins this year because of the way they played, right?
And like we said, sorry to cut you off, and I want to let you keep rolling, but 18-1, they lost 6 of their first 9.
Yeah. And so at the end of it, and you knew there was going to be, some growing pains, right? But then after they kind of got through that, this team, it surprised the masses. But again, as I called their first series with RPI, it was no surprise. It was immediate change in my eyes on that squad on the ice. It was immediately known that this team was different. Now, granted, they want to keep building up, right? But to me, that means you keep the train rolling the way it is. You're going to win with effort. You're going to win with the strong special teams, which they had. Again, we mentioned the numbers. Their PK, holy cow, right? Just a couple shades under 90%. That's been their specialty. Their power play over 20%. And then now, can you get some maybe more offense, right? I think we see that his commitment is to defense first. He's essentially said that is our game plan. We're going to defend really well. We're going to protect our house. And then we're going to find a way to transition the other way and then make them work on their defensive end, right? That's the next step. But still, fundamentally, it's the effort and him, the execution of his systems. That's what's going to be in year 2.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where this group goes, and I'm excited to see over the long term where they end up because, it's kind of almost like the transfer portal a couple of years ago. It's going to take probably a good 4 or 5 years before we really get the full scope of where we're at related to the shockwave that is these giant roster changes and this coaching change. So this women's program definitely get a ticket, would be a must-watch hockey, I think, next season. Can also use your support. Again, one of the best teams in program history, and the attendance barely peaked over 400 for any of the games, and it's just asinine. It drives me bonkers.
Well, let's say this, right, Noah, and that is, it's not a secret, right? This program has, shall we say, not been giving, shall we say, the fans reason for interest. I think that's fair to say, and I'm not putting it on one particular coaching staff or a particular group of players. Unfortunately, this program's had a long history of that. So it doesn't fall on any one individual, any one group. It's been sort of, shall we say, the MO, right? And I think part of the reason why we're seeing this huge roster turnover is that Bronowski laid a nuclear bomb in this program, not in a bad way. He just simply said, hey, the men can win here. Why the hell can't the women win? Mm-hmm. And he showed that it's possible, right?
And he showed it before at North Dakota, too. He's already built a template like that.
He built a template, and not only that, you talk about non-traditional hockey, Mark. He took Team China, right, who trained actually here in the Twin Cities in Duluth, and basically brought them to prominence on the international stage, right? Set essentially an Olympic record for the best PK, over 90% during that tournament. So he's shown that he can take players that are committed, that want to win, that want to follow a system, and he can make that team buzz, right? And so with that sometimes comes tough conversations and tough habits being changed, and he did that, and he stood his ground, right? That's not an easy thing to do. But on the flip side, back to the fans, now the fans need to respond, right? Which is, this team is heading in the right direction. This was a fun team to follow this year. Again, it was almost as fun as following essentially St. Thomas sometimes in the CCHA playoffs and wondering what they're going to do, because ironically, they're kind of similar, right? Which is, they're kind of the underdog that has some shiny moments here and there. But the one difference for St. Cloud is now it's just a different brand of hockey, and more so, I think the ceiling's higher for this squad. I really, really do. Yeah. And I think if you're, a hockey fan, especially a St. Cloud State fan, go out and support this squad. They could use it. The Herb Brooks, I mean, it's a character rink. put some butts in the seats, man. Go follow this squad because, home ice advantage, it's a thing. Talk to any player who's played at that level. If you put some asses in those seats, I'll tell you what, this team with that support could be even stronger next year.
It's especially with the double headers, no excuse, no excuse 100%. To not be at those games. So especially even if you can't make them all on the weekend, for sure on a Saturday, if you can make it, definitely could use your support.
I'm surprised that St. Cloud, not to interject, but I'm surprised that St. Cloud doesn't offer like a group package for those, like at a discounted rate. Just to fill the seats, right? For both. I mean, why not? I mean, maybe I'm no economics, professor, but even if you chop off $5 or $6 here and there, at least you're putting some money back into St. Cloud rather than zero and having empty seats. I mean, that's just me. But.
Or maybe if you go to both games, you get like a free popcorn and a free drink or something like that. Just something to kind of
voucher to Domino's. I mean, you could build marketing strategy. We should take over the marketing strategies for St. Cloud.
We shouldn't. We can hardly handle ourselves.
We'll get Caleb JP Body to head it, and then we'll just be,
every advertising campaign we do would be in all caps. That would be fantastic.
It'd be me getting, smoked in the face by a metal folding chair and a wrestling mat somewhere in the middle of the herb.
Okay, you had lost me, and now you're bringing me back around to center. I'm thinking we should do this. Well,
I see the opportunity now. I know.
Speaking of getting hit with a folding chair, though, how about the first round of the NHL playoffs here? Let's talk about that.
Holy cow!
Yeah. Well, why don't we start with the first thing that's on my list anyway? Obviously, a lot of upsets going on. How about the earliest exit here in the playoffs? Are the Winnipeg Jets out relatively early here? Rick Bowness did not mince words when he talked about his teams and the effort that they gave against Vegas in that final game. A lot of people thought it was kind of classless, including some of the players, former captain Blake Wheeler and things like that. Yeah, exactly. And Nick, you and I talked about this pre-show. I don't think either of us had a problem with him being bluntly honest. And I think that's what Winnipeg needs. And you and I also talked about this pre-show. The glaring comparison was the Minnesota Wild team of yesteryear, 2017 and 2019. Like you mentioned, that first team, especially,
basically.
Yeah, a core that was a bunch of prima donnas that the GM didn't want to get rid of, and it's starting to cost them.
Well, and I think, let's clarify, right? For those who follow coaching and, shall we say, media strategy, right? We're okay with Rick Bowness because we understand that was a strategic thing that he did, right? It wasn't like this is freewheeling and he's just running his mouth. Any NHL head coach, and I would even argue Tortorella was really good at this at times, right? Was you understand, especially nowadays, that whatever you say, whatever you do, especially at that level, your players are gonna see it. Obviously they did, right? And that was a laser guided bomb directly aimed at that locker room. I'm not as shocked, and nor I don't think you would be at that the Jets lost to the Golden Knights, but I think in the way that they did, and again, I think Rick Bowness had a head on, right? And that is this team when it went down the way that it did, and maybe was it because they thought that maybe they had a chance in games 3 and 4 to make it a series and they just couldn't get a bounce, sure. But like you said, there was no pushback. It wasn't like, okay, well, sometimes hockey's a bounce, right? Ask Ryan Hartman in game 6, right, about a bounce and the Minnesota Wild, right? Sometimes that's just the way the game works, and you have to sort of put it behind you. You have to have that short-term memory. Now, the curious part is, and I think we talked about this before, Noah, what's the next move, right? Kevin Cheveldayoff, I think, bears a lot of blame on this. And again, our comparison to the Wild. I don't know if the Wild's core and whole was a prima donna, but certainly Suter Parise. We all know that those reports are out there. They seem to be pretty vindicated right now. And
that cross check from Ryan Reeves to Suter again starts to make a heck of a lot more sense.
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
And I think also too, right? The other comparison is, Chuck Fletcher saw a core that he believed in, even though failure after failure didn't want to rattle the cage, make even sometimes one trade, right? Sometimes one trade is enough. He didn't make any. Cheveldayoff with Winnipeg has done the same thing. He's stuck with the same core. Are they all good hockey players? Sure. But at the end of the day, this group, this chemistry isn't getting it done. And after coaching changes, Paul Maurice left in the middle of last season because he felt like they needed a new voice. Then they bring in Rick Bowness. What more can Winnipeg do beyond changing the roster? I think they're at the point where their hands are tied. They have to make changes.
Yeah, Blake Wheeler, Mark Scheifele, all those guys. Got Pierre-Luc Dubois is headed to Montreal. There's no doubt about it. Nikolai Ehlers is a question mark. Connor Hellebuck wants to win now. You listen to his conference after. Yep, he's definitely wants to be out of there too. So, I had no problem with it. I mean, kudos to him, honestly, for having the gall to be able to say that. I like the transparency, from a head coach who's, laying it out point blank. That organization definitely needs rejuvenation. But again, as we talked about with the Chicago Blackhawks, I have no problem with a Central Division opponent struggling. There's no issue with that.
Until I land Connor Bedard, then all bets are off.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, how about another Central Division foe? The defending Stanley Cup champion Colorado Avalanche ousted in 7 games by the Seattle Kraken, who scored first in every game of the series. This is the lesser of the 2 upsets from that night in question. Sounds like
that, right?
sounds like a jury testimony. But yeah, this Avs team did not look like themselves, and I think people don't realize how good of a defensively sound team Seattle actually is, and Grubauer stood on his head with a couple of grade A saves, and to see him beat the Colorado Avalanche, I'm excited. Good for Seattle. Again, it goes back to the principle of, as long as they make it far but don't actually win the dang thing, I think everyone's happy, right?
A couple of things, right? Colorado created chances, right? They had plenty of grade A chances. Grubauer stood in it,
McKinnon had 10 shots.
Yeah. How about that for Grubauer? Basically, essentially with the expansion draft was told, you're not helping us win a cup. He didn't, right? Darcy Kemper did, but then he was gone after a year. I wonder what was going through his head, in Game 7. I bet there was some motivation in between, his pads and, his goalie mask to be able to have a great Game 7. But to your point, Avalanche also injuries hurt them, right? No Landeskog, no Nichushkin. Which is also a separate conversation we can have at a later time. Again, you had Makar suspended for a game. It just felt like this Colorado Avalanche squad, although they still were dangerous, they just weren't the same, right? They just didn't have that same ability to take over a game and, more importantly, make people pay with the scoreboard, right? McKinnon, wow. I think he had a wonderful Game 7. We talked about this with Kaprizov last year. Did, I think, everything he could have done. But Seattle, again, beyond that top line of Rantanen, McKinnon, Colorado didn't really have any depth scoring. That's the big difference between this year and last year. Remember, last year, Nazem Kadri, Nichushkin, Darren Helm, right, were all contributors. We didn't really see that this first round in Seattle. It's just steady, right? There was a steady, and then the opportunities. How about Oliver Bjorkstrand with 2 goals to seal that?
Yeah. What a shot in the second one.
Yeah, what a shot. And how about this, right? We forget this game could have been tied and it was called back from offside. You kind of wonder if when that goal was called back, if that had a mental effect on the Avalanche players. Because if that goal stands, if that's not offside, we may be talking about the Avalanche again going into round number 2. So, again, hockey is a crazy sport sometimes, but it's Seattle this time and good for them.
Certainly agree. I think the Edmonton LA series gave us everything we expected. The Oilers come out of that one. That was pretty cut and dry. Carolina Islanders, same thing. Expected the Hurricanes to come out. They did. The game that ended the first round, the Devils kicked the absolute crap out of the Rangers, winning 4 straight. What a bit of an implosion for that young Rangers team that was veteran laden with some big names on the other side of it, and it really didn't pay off.
Young until they weren't young anymore.
They're like there's nobody that's like maybe Vinny Trocheck, I guess, but guys that that are in like that 27 to like 31 range. Yeah, there's like it's either you're still wearing a diaper or you have a cane. Well, Patrick Kane, but like an actual cane. There was no in between on that team.
It's a C, not a K. Yeah.
Yeah. Shesterkin played out of his mind though in that series, and apparently Akira Schmid is the answer.
How about that, right? The decision from Lindy Ruff, because I mean, it's hard, especially when your goalie, which has been solid all regular season, right? And we're going to talk about this in the Wild too with the goaltending decisions, right? Vanacek just, for whatever reason, just looked ruffled, right? He just didn't look comfortable those first two games. And when you have an unproven rookie, but at that point, it's like either you're going to go down 3-0 and you're going to give it a different shot, or you might steal a game. Maybe the original thought was to give Vanacek a game to break and maybe just have him reset. But then Schmidt comes in and he goes, "No, this is my net. I'm not giving it back to you." Right. And it was the rejuvenation that New Jersey needed. They kind of surprised me a bit because I thought, and I think my prediction was the Rangers in this series, because I thought they were the more veteran group and New Jersey just didn't have that playoff experience. And well, Schmidt was the lifesaver quite literally, because if he was not to what his caliber was, I still think the Rangers take that series. That goaltending change changed the outcome of that entire 7-game.
There's another series that had a healthy dose of that on both sides. Linus Ullmark playing through an injury, but how about the Alex Lyon experiment not working? Sergei Bobrovsky comes in. The Florida Panthers, from 3-1 down in that series, come back, tied Game 7 with just over a minute remaining, and they win it in overtime on Carter Verhaeghe's shot. I don't think any of us, you got to that point where it was 3-1 and you're like, yeah, they might extend it to 6, but like the Panthers are done, right? Like they're just, they barely scraped into the playoffs. That Bruins team is just too good. They've shown they can close all season. What a perfect storm. The Panthers are on to the second round.
And funny how when we were predicting that, we both, myself included, said the Bruins should win this series. But my concern was, hey, the only team that could screw the Bruins is themselves, and it kind of felt that way, didn't it, Noah, after the 3-1? And also, not to take anything away from Florida, because I think they didn't just roll over and play dead, right? They still grinded it out. And mind you, Game 7, they had to come back in the final minute up 2-0. They squander 3 straight. And mind you, that third goal from Bobrovsky, that rebound was just terrible, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's goaltending 101, not to throw a rebound right to the stick of the best goal scorer in the league in David Pastrnak. But they tie it. They just wouldn't go away. And then a small but an important defensive breakdown in overtime. And Verhaeghe from that faceoff dot, man, what a shot. Just rifled that.
How about the coming out party for Brandon Montour, by the way, just really defining himself as a steady defenseman.
Is it really a coming out party, though? I think maybe on a national scale, yes, but he was like that most of the season with Florida.
But I feel like this is the first year that he's kind of found that energy. You know what I mean? Where it's like he finally has flourished into that next step. By the way, at the time of recording, the Panthers lead the Maple Leafs 3-2 right now. With 8 minutes left in period number 3.
Like the sixth dimension if the Stanley Cup final was the Seattle Kraken and the Florida Panthers.
Well, Florida's going to have home ice advantage, apparently. The whole ticket sales thing is, I don't know how I feel about that, but whatever. Gamesmanship, I guess, whatever. I guess you're getting it done. The Leafs got it done too, finally. Overtime, Game 6 over the Tampa Bay Lightning. I had that feeling. It's like, I know we say every year that this year is the year, but this group just felt like they had the ability to close a little bit differently. And I feel like Game 5, even, they weren't out of that hockey game. We talked about it where.
No, they weren't. And they were built differently, right? Again, the additions of Ryan O'Reilly, the smarts, especially defensively, right?
Were they built for tough?
No, they were not. But and then Samsonov, right? You kind of felt like the last few seasons that the Leafs just sort of hung their goaltender out to dry, and they wanted him to steal a series. They didn't have to, although Samsonov also made some key saves when he needed to. But I think just overall, from a depth up front, this team was more built that still had that scoring touch, that still had that firepower. But that third and fourth lines, right, really embraced that shutdown role. Again, Ryan O'Reilly, a big piece of that. Again, Tavares, the game winner, right? That's what they brought him in for. Finally, that $9 million a year is paying off in a big moment, right?
Yeah.
Besides him and Mitch Marner, which undeservedly so, was giving criticism for some of the Leafs early round exits of years past. They were finally sort of the key difference makers, right? They finally got him to the second round. Now that they're there, right, now what can they do now? So
yeah, Leafs Panthers going on right now. Kraken and Stars play later tonight on Tuesday, and then we flip over to the other two games. Of course, the Vegas Golden Knights, Edmonton Oilers, and then Carolina and New Jersey doing battle on day number 2. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting second round. We're obviously going to cover it. We won't be covering the Wild as far as the second round, though. Of course, their first round exit revealed that Eriksson Ek had a broken leg in his return. Don't really know if Kaprizov was 100%. I think the one thing we can say is, regardless of if he was or wasn't, there's been a lot of criticism for him. Let's be real. He got 2.5, 3 games before being thrown into the playoffs after coming back from a pretty serious groin injury and missing over a month. I'm not making excuses for the man, but that's a tough jump. And then Matt Zuccarello also with a groin injury as well too. The Wild exited with a whimper, scoring 1 goal in their last 2 contests. I'm going to be honest, as much as we should maybe expect the Minnesota sports storyline and want to tell ourselves differently, I didn't think it was going to be this ugly. Just based on how the rest of the series went, even game number 2, I was kind of shocked. I'm going to the Minnesota Wild teams of years past, even the playoff series, I thought we were getting something different. I really did.
So did I. And I think, can we just say it? I'm going to. Eriksson Ek, his absence was felt in multiple areas of the ice. Now, does it come down to one person? No. But at the end of the day, you saw it in Game 5. That to me was a real indication, just because Dallas, especially defensively, our forecheck was non-existent for the last 2 games. At times, did they have some pressure? Sure. But as far as creating grade A chances, not really much. There was a couple.
It's just,
it's tough.
Well, it's tough because had the Wild either taken less penalties or been strong on the PK, they would have won this series. They could have won it in 5 games.
They could have. And funny, because last time we recorded, you were a little more bullish on the power play. I wasn't quite as sold on the power play. We both were, shall we say, taking the penalty kill to the dry cleaners of how terrible it was. And ultimately, again, you can't equate one area as the only reason, but I think it is fair to say that number 1, 5, and 5, the Wild and the Stars were pretty deadlocked right now. I would give maybe a slight edge to the Wild. Mm-hmm. Special teams, though, all Dallas on both sides, and it wasn't even close. And in the face-off dot, if you want to throw that in there too.
Yeah, I mean, statistically, like I said, when we talked about it, the power play actually statistically was fairly serviceable, if not better, for Minnesota for the first 4 games. But I mean, it just
would say otherwise.
it just disappeared. In games 5 and 6, the Wild they didn't remotely look like themselves. I think the real killer is when you go into Game 5 on the road and you just lay an absolute egg. It's an uncompetitive matchup, and now not only are you scrambling to stay alive in Game 6, but you're dealing with the pressure that 2 of the 3 games in Dallas that you dropped absolute goose eggs, and the third one you probably should have lost it in overtime just based on the way that game finished. I think the mental confidence was kind of shattered a little bit. Another first round exit, man. I mean, what more can you really?
It's tough, but and maybe it's just me, and this is going to be maybe a lukewarm take, but this whole first round exit thing, it's old to me. And here's why I say it's old.
What are you, a Leafs fan?
Yeah, right. Pretty damn close at this point as they play off futility. But it's not fair to keep saying that this team every year is in the first round, because every season's different. And like you said, we felt like, and I think we can both agree that if this team was fully healthy, if they had Eriksson Ek, if Kaprizov didn't have that injury and was, shall we say, in game speed, if he had caught up, I'm still not convinced they didn't have some injury he was playing through. Doesn't want to admit it. I'm still not buying what he says. I'm going to be straight up honest with you. But I do feel like the series is different. Does it mean that the result is different? I don't know, because here's the other thing, Noah. We have got to tip our caps to Dallas, especially on their own blue line. They, especially in the power play, they made zone entries a living hell. They were forcing our puck carriers to make decisions before they wanted to. On the forecheck, they gave us the perimeter. I felt like our fourth line, you saw, especially games 5 and 6, was, shall we say, taking long stretches on the bench. And at the end of it, let's put it this way, that extra, 12, almost $13 million in cap that we could utilize hurts.
Yeah, it does hurt. And you know what? And it hurts how much Bill Guerin actually did a great job being able to still kind of go pseudo all in a little bit with the space that he had available. Gustav Nyquist, I mean, what a shame we can't keep him in a Wild sweater. I mean, I would love to see him return, but it's just not going to happen.
Fit. He was a seamless fit.
Yeah. That's what good players do, right? Like,
yeah. The one good news, and we'll get to that later, is that there are at least one player that is coming back, and deservedly so.
You mean one of the deadline acquisitions that everyone was poo-pooing? One of them?
The one that I'm not sure why people are poo-pooing because of the production that he had. Yeah, that one. And especially with the chemistry, right? You can buy a $14 million player if you have the cap space, but you cannot buy chemistry with a line mate that essentially makes that market inefficiency, right?
4 words, poor man's Kevin Fiala. Okay,
exactly,
cool.
Right. So I don't know. It's disappointing, right? I was at game 3 as far as games at the Xcel Energy Center. I've been a part as a fan, as a writer in both regular season and playoffs. One of the loudest I've ever heard that building, especially when Eriksson Ek's name was announced. This is going to be probably a poor comparison, but it felt like the Metrodome. Because the Dome, although it was crappy as a building that was, the one advantage that at that thing was a sound
amplifier.
It was an amplifier, right? And for a brief moment there, it almost gave me chills with how loud that building was when his name was announced. So granted, his return lasted all of 19 seconds, and I think we all sort of weren't surprised by the actual official announcement, but maybe more surprised that he still tried it for 19 seconds. I mean, my goodness. But yeah, and now it gets tougher, right? Salary cap only, from what we know, may only go up $1 million. You add $2 more million in dead cap for the next 2 years, so you're still effectively losing $1 million. You've got to re-sign your best goaltender, who is a RFA with arbitration rights. This is going to be tough of an off season, and I don't know. I don't know. What do you think? Is it really as tough as I'm making it out to be?
Well, here's my question. Would you like to talk about it?
Sure.
Why don't we? Let's head on to the Extra Ice session. And welcome into the Extra Ice session, episode 160. Nick Max and Noah Grant here to close out the show. The Minnesota Wild offseason. The big news that the Wild just got today on Tuesday. Marcus Johansson, the aforementioned poor man's Kevin Fiala, 2 years, $4 million total for this contract. A great pickup. He was more than adequate down the stretch and has great chemistry with Matt Boldy. So that's a fantastic pickup here. Let's kind of lay out the entire table here. So as usual, Nick, I'm about to monologue. That's new. Sit back and grab a pillow, I guess. But the inkling is Matt Dumba wants to return. I don't know how feasible it is, but he has mentioned that he'd like to stay. Would he take a hometown discount? Don't know. Is he in Bill Guerin's plans? Don't really know. What we can tell you, Marc-Andre Fleury, 1 year left on his deal. He wants to stay in Minnesota, finish out that contract, and then reevaluate his career after next season. So cap constraints well known after the Johansson deal today. The Wild have about $8.1 million to re-sign Philip Gustafsson, Brandon Duhaime, Kalen Addison, and potentially Ryan Reeves, who Bill Guerin is very high on. And this is coming all from the Athletic. So great job, Michael Russo, Joe Smith, guys like that. Guerin says they don't think they're going to be able to re-sign Matt Dumba, Gustav Nyquist. It was pretty much between Nyquist and Johansson as to who to pick, and that they felt Nyquist might command a little bit more on the market. So they stuck with the guy that was there most of the trade deadline onward. John Klingberg is not expected to be back. Oscar Sundqvist, who was a very questionable scratch down the stretch, also had some injury too, but not expected to re-sign him. And Sam Steele is a question mark at best, and they also have to decide if Mason Shaw is going to be on IR at least to start the season. Also keep in mind, Marco Rossi, $864,000 cap hit. Kalen Addison's qualifying offer, $825,000. Reports say Ryan Reeves is hoping for a 2-year deal, but the Wild prefer a 1-year deal for the 35-year-old. And then Alex Goligoski is also the question mark, $2 million for his last year of his deal next season, scratched 36 times this year, missed all the games in the playoffs, and he wasn't exactly happy. The meeting with him postseason was very short, according to Bill Guerin. They're going to circle back later. Very potential that $2 million might be freed up depending on what Alex Goligoski wants to do as well, too, which would give the Wild about $10 million in cap space, all things considered. Isn't going to be easy. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with the RFAs. And so I don't know if you're probably going to go with that, but it's because there is one big one that you have to sign first. And I'm surprised that maybe not as much as I should be, but Johansson. I thought Gustafson would be probably number one.
Yep.
But possibly because, again, he does have arbitration rights, throws an extra wrinkle. So maybe you try to secure a player that, again, that had instant chemistry with Matt Boldy. Again, that line with Eriksson Ek was money when they were together, when they were all healthy. So I get that part. And at $2 million, you can't say no to that.
And you hope like he'd take a bridge deal. You just need to get him to 2025. I mean, that's just what it comes down to.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, the freaking NHL, right? And I say it that way because the Wild wouldn't be as cap strapped as they are if the pandemic doesn't happen.
Yeah,
let's put it that way, right? I mean, when the league had to essentially do a flat cap, part of I think where Bill Guerin, when he bought up Parise and Suter, was like, yeah, the money may suck, but it's going to be further enough down the line where the cap should grow enough where it's not going to be as impactful. And then in true Minnesota Wild sports fashion, we get something unbeknownst to the entire world, and then that creates this flat cap environment that we're in.
And the inconsistency, you look at the kind of the alleviation that a team like New Jersey got with the Ilya Kovalchuk situation, but then for Minnesota, don't get the same. You don't get the same kind of relief. I think it just it stings to an extra degree.
It does sting, but at the end of the day, those are two very different situations too, where that's a player in Kovalchuk that literally said, I'm not putting on skates, I'm going overseas. So
want to have a question about cap circumvention for the 47th time again, though?
Yeah, sure, right? But either way, Gustafson is going to be the first person that is signed because at the end of the day, they need him. He was the better goaltender. He's the true number one. Marc-Andre Fleury, you mentioned him earlier, has said that he'd be okay in a backup role. He essentially was the backup role, I think, as we headed more into the second half of the season. Can still play, apparently just not in game 2 against Dallas, even though that wasn't definitely all his fault. So side note there. But that is going to tell Bill Guerin what he's got left, right? And we still don't know what the salary cap is going to be right now. The NHL has said likely around $1 million. That is not a firm number yet. That number doesn't get set until June/July, when the league's finances are all finalized for the previous year. So is it possible? Maybe that there's an extra $1 million there, possibly, maybe. Likely, I don't know. But at the end of it, Gustafson's the number one priority. You hope he takes a bridge deal, but his body of work, the wins, losses, the goals against, the save percentage is going to make that a little bit more difficult for the Wild to, shall we say, have a little bit more power at the bargaining table. Where Gustafson, although he's younger, I don't know. We'll see what happens here. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on this because, again, Gustafson's qualifying offer isn't going to be terribly big. But
how long is it going to take?
That's the thing.
Yeah, and you hope it's done sooner rather than later. The other thing with Gustafson too, I think that Bill Guerin has a bargaining chip is being able to say, kind of like Alex Nedeljkovic a little bit. We're saying like your body of work hasn't been a large enough sample size. We need to see, maybe one more season. Give him that bridge deal. Get him to 2025. Then you're really going to know. Jesper Wallstedt is going to continue to percolate down in the minors. We'll see how he assimilates maybe after next season if he's kind of the right-hand man to Gustafson, replacing Marc-Andre Fleury in the future. Ryan Reeves is a curious case. I know a lot of people are kind of freaking out about the fact that Bill Guerin wants to resign him. He's going to be like a league minimum guy, though. You know what I mean? Like it's not like he's going to be asking for a ton here. So I think I actually thought he was okay down the stretch. A lot of people were saying, well, if he's not a PK guy, though, he's a specialist and he's not serviceable. Like, okay, that's a piss poor argument, to say the least. Not every fourth line guy is a PK guy. Like you can still be a good addition. He's a great locker room guy, kind of fills the void that a guy like Matt Dumba would leave, and kind of bridge that. He can beat the crap out of anybody. And on top of that, was largely serviceable in the fourth line, even if not on a special teams role. I think at least even if he's a 13th forward at times, I think he's worth hanging on to for that price point. I'd love to see Oscar Sundqvist back, but I think Sundqvist and Reeves are kind of two sides of the same coin. Sundqvist a little bit more skill based, obviously, and younger, but
and that would get more money. That's the thing.
Sam Steels, I really don't know. I like how highly do you feel about Marco Rossi being able to make?
Do you want my honest opinion? Not very good, honestly. Because even when he had that game against Chicago right towards the end of the season, I didn't, and maybe again end of the season, maybe there isn't as much jump, but and maybe I'm overanalyzing the hell out of this, but I didn't feel that Rossi showed the type of game that Bill Guerin wanted him to bring, which is go after it. Like, this is my puck, and sort of like take control, right?
Yeah.
Now it's Rossi, right? Remember, it's Rossi is the proper pronunciation. But
all right, we're talking about chicken roast on this.
I know. Here we go. Right. But this is a huge year for Rossi, right? It's huge for him and the organization, right? I look at the center pick that was before Rossi. That was Anton Lundell of the Florida Panthers, right? That was the other center that was...
And Cole Perfetti was right next to him for Winnipeg, too.
Right. Yeah. I still think Anton Lundell has been the more serviceable NHL-ready center. He's been well in the playoffs, but at the end of it, this is going to be your 3 in pro. Now, granted, he's had, what do you call it? The medical side effects of COVID.
Yeah, myocarditis. And that's the thing is, really the difference maker, people don't realize this, is really going to be who do they bring in down in Iowa? Who's ready to lead that development charge for him? We got to realize, too, and we've talked about this, the same conversation went back to Mikhail Granlund, to Joel Eriksson. Sometimes it just takes time. I mean, he's so young where it's like he might still have 2 or 3 years before he finally kind of fits that mold of an everyday NHLer here.
AKA Tage Thompson.
Yeah. Will the Wild be that patient with him? I think they should.
I think they have to be because, again, it's not like they have dollars that they can spend. If anything, Rossi is their, I don't want to characterize a player like this, but he's kind of like a safety valve, right? Whereas, next year and the year after that, it's the worst of the cap strap years, $14.7 million, almost $15 million that the Wild are unable to spend because of those recapture penalties from the buyouts. But I know, and maybe this is the bigger question, Noah. Does Rossi just need a full season in the NHL just to try to figure it out? Because you saw the last 2 years, right?
Yeah, Bill Guerin has said otherwise. He said, actually, we don't really want to throw him into the fire for the sake of throwing him into the fire. So
but here's my counter argument, right? And I'm not trying to cut you off or anything, but he's had 2 years where his production, his point value was almost a point per game player. So, and it goes back to the same conversation we had with Shane Wright, which is what is actually more beneficial to him, right? Is it in the minors? Is it in, he had the juniors eligibility. Or is it sticking with the big club?
He's not a bottom 6 or 4th line guy. And I think for Minnesota right now, they're not deep, but they're set up just enough to where at best he'd be a 3rd line guy. And I just don't know if maybe he just doesn't thrive in that environment. Especially like he did in the preseason where he was playing a lot, kind of an elevated role, got a lot of opportunities. Again, it's preseason, so a lot of other pieces to that too. But, and I think it's the same conversation we're having with Kalen Addison is I think, I don't want to say we're in a wait and see mode, but I think 2025 continues to be the goal where I think at that point you continue to see how those guys develop, how they potentially assimilate into the big club. And I think that's the point where you're going to see Bill Guerin say, okay, who are these young guys and veteran guys who are getting the job done? Who needs to kind of jump shift? And I think 2025 is going to be the defining point of, are we a couple pieces away and now we have the opportunity to get them? Or are we at that point where we need to start kind of offloading some guys and really kind of rebuilding this core and saying like Marco Rossi, maybe isn't at that point right now. Maybe we need to start looking at other avenues in the center position and move away from that.
I can tell you exactly what they are doing because you already said it. And to me, it's not a question of they're going to be questioning themselves. They know exactly what they have to do, and they're already doing it. Because I actually disagree with your point. I actually don't think they are in that same sort of, linear path here, because here's why. Kirill Kaprizov, he will be 1 year from a UFA status after these contracts come off the books to go down to 1.6 million per year. It's essentially a wash right at that point. But you've already seen it with the lockup of Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, Eric Sinek, now Freddie Gaudreau, Matt Boldy, right? Bill Gainer's already telling us this is the core that he wants.
Sorry, let me clarify. I didn't mean it in the sense of guys that are already there. Maybe guys that are expiring contracts, but like these guys that aren't part of that core roster.
I get that. But the thing that you have to understand is they do want that flexibility after that. Is they want to be in a position where they only want to be able to fill in a couple pieces. If they come out of this cap constraint era and they don't have a good enough core where you just need an extra couple pieces, where then you're going to have a big checkbook you can write, not only because you're going to have that money to spend again, but ideally the salary cap situation is going to be better too, where you can now go out and maybe get that big expensive center, maybe two of them, right? Where that fills out to be a Stanley Cup contender. That's where this is going. That's where it has to go. And I think that's why when you look at guys like Marco Rossi, yes, you have to be patient a bit, but at the same time, I think these years are actually more important than if they didn't have these cap constraints. I really don't. Because I think you're going to have to make decisions. I think Kalen Addison is a question mark here. Again, he was non-existent in the lineup the last, quarter of the season. And I'm not taking anything away from these players, because I think in a different organization, they're handled quite differently. I think they're like, just stay patient. They're 21, 22 years of age, right? The Wild with Kaprizov and with some of these players, they put themselves in the spot. It's not an easy spot. So to me, it's not quite as simple as that. And I do think that these seasons mean more to Rossi and possibly Addison if he isn't traded. I still think there's a chance he's traded.
Yeah, but with the departure of Matt Dumba, we might see him in the lineup more than you think. The other thing that has also been expressed from Bill Guerin is that Brock Faber sounds like he's going to be an everyday NHLer, at least to start next season. I think the ultimate question boils down to this with all these changes. Should we be surprised if the Minnesota Wild do not make the playoffs next season?
No.
I agree.
No. And honestly, you're sort of, it's sort of a good thing. Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, I'd rather lose in 6 than not make the playoffs at all. At least there's some intrigue there.
Except for this draft class.
Right. But at the end of the day, right, you weren't ever going to be Bedard, Fantilli, Mitchkov type territory, but this is a deep draft, right? Who's to say you can't package something to move up in the draft? They won't, but never say never, right? And at the end of it, I think the Wild would, gosh, this is going to be scorching hot around the airwaves out there. It might be beneficial for them to do that. Now, the problem is that if you do that, does that mean that Marc-Andre Fleury, that probably would like to be in a playoff contender, does that mean you get to trade him? Does that open up some salary cap that way?
The bigger fear is, does it scare away a guy like Kirill Kaprizov going down the line?
And that's the flip side of this, is why he signed these many players, right? And to also have a big checkbook is he's indicating to Kaprizov, we're a good team. Screw the cap constraints. We can still be competitive. And maybe we haven't said this enough. The fact that they were still fairly competitive while being restrained by $13 million the last couple of seasons is still
a couple points out of winning the Central.
A miracle, right?
Yeah.
Imagine if they had a couple of other top. I mean, you could buy 2 top 6 forwards with that easily, right? With that amount of money that they couldn't use. Who's to say it, right? Now, Boley will be seasoned. Eric Sinek, we know what he is. He's a bona fide player. You're going to have Brock Faber, Jonas Brodin. Your core is going to be there, right? And ideally, if you do get that, shall we say, development of Rossi, maybe Addison, right? And then you throw in some of their drafts, some of their trades, and then you get a deep pocketbook. This team is positioning itself well to, in that when 2025 rolls around, this team could be in a really scary good position to be like, here's my chips and here we go. Yeah. And they have to, like you said, because of Kaprizov, because you're going to have to convince him that he can win a Stanley Cup here. And it's going to take a very strategic plan to get there. And I think, again, with these rookies, part of why I think it's more fragile than normal is because of that reason.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting time to be a Minnesota Wild fan. I think that's the easy way of putting it here. Of course, the second round of the NHL playoffs continues on. We are going to cover that. We're going to circle back to some other topics, though. We'll keep an eye on player moves, obviously. Any news that we hear related to St. Cloud, of course, and the Wild, obviously. We're also at some point probably going to circle back to both Arizona and the Atlanta bid, and not bid, but
it's sort of a bid because it is an arena district.
The thingamajig. We'll circle back and talk about those sorts of things too. So a lot of topics that we've kind of pushed off for a little bit or kind of waited to hear some more developments. We're going to kind of talk about those as we go through into the month of May. Crazy. We are at the precipice of summer, so to speak. And unfortunately, the Minnesota Wild are at the driving range right now, but it is what it is. So with that being said, for episode 160 and Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.